Welcome to the Pro Aging Podcast. I'm Steve Gurney, founder of the Positive Aging Community. We're excited that you can join us for our interactive discussions with pioneers and thought leaders on a wide variety of topics related to aging and longevity. Today we feature a discussion with Martha Calihan MD, who is the author of A Death Lived. In 2010, Dr. Calihan's husband of 30 years began to die. Being a wife and a physician, she did the only thing she could do. She meticulously and compassionately described what it was like and authored her book. And today she shares her story and much more on our episode. So let's jump into an engaging discussion with Dr. Calihan. And I am delighted today to have Dr. Martha Calihan, who is a physician, and she's the author of the book A Death Lived, leading us in a discussion. And I had mentioned Capital Caring Health, but Cynthia Shannon with Capital Caring Health heard Dr. Calihan speak, and I think she called me in her car on the way home and said, "You've got to get her on." So I am really charged up about this discussion today. And Dr. Calihan, thanks so much for making time to be with us. And before we dive in to this topic and your book, let's get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what led to the career path that you have taken.
Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate being invited to be on here. I'm excited about it. It's a topic that is near and dear to my heart, but not just for personal reasons, professional as well. So I've been a physician for about 40 years. I always hate to have to add that up and think, really? But it's true. And I will say I absolutely love what I do. I think I grew up knowing I wanted to be a physician and went in that career path. I did regular family medicine for probably 20 years. And the last almost 20 years, I've done my own sort of type of practice where I do integrative functional medicine, which is a little bit different. But in all of it, I think when I reflect on my medical career, some of the most significant work I think I've ever done is working with people who were dealing with end of life. And then in 2010, when I lost Charles, it came home to us. We had a long, drawn-out process of his illness. And
Charles is your husband.
Charles is my husband. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
And I didn't really set out to write the book at the start of it, but through the process, it just became very clear to me that it sort of needed to be written. But so I work with people all across the age spectrum, and work, as I said, I think I've always really been drawn towards end of life care, both professionally and then personally.
Now, what type of physician are you? And I'm going to bring up this website. This is your current practice, 5
Right.
Stones.
Yeah. So I'm trained in family medicine, and did that, but now it is a holistic, a functional medicine practice, which is a little bit different in that we really focus on looking at, I'll call it root causes of issues. So I deal with people with more chronic complex conditions, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, a lot of long COVID, autoimmune things. It's kind of a specialty niche now.
Great. And then I'm going to drop this into the chat for everybody, but this is also a great place to access information on Dr. Calihan's book. And I'm going to click on this here. And the book is A Death Lived, and it's a memoir. But tell us a little bit about. Let's dive into this topic, and maybe the best way to dive into it is for you to tell us a little bit about the story of Charles and the inspiration for this book.
Yeah. So as there's so many things, but Charles and I were married for 30 years. He's absolutely the love of my life. And as I say to people, I loved him enough to be willing to help him leave. It pure and simple. End of life care became something we knew we had to address. And I really wrote the book because my experience was twofold, right? His wife and a practicing physician, not his physician, absolutely not. But I watched it unfold through both vantage points. And I saw the challenges on both sides of the equation. I saw great potential. We had some terrific care. He was brought back from the brink many times. But in full candor, we as physicians, excluding our hospice colleagues, but most of us are not trained well at all in dealing with end-of-life issues. We are taught what to do to save lives, to get people better. There's always sort of another thing that can be done. And it became very clear to me that just because we can do it, it's not always the case that we should do it. Charles got to the point where he got tired of it all. He wanted to go home. He wanted to get out of the hospital. We had 6 ICU admissions in the last year of his life. That's just too much.
Wow.
They're probably, we could have probably stretched it to 7 or maybe 8. But in the end, he made the decision. He wanted to come home. He wanted to spend time. We had months together, as a family, sort of in this intense, we know he's dying, we don't know when experience. And
Now,
it was rich and powerful.
Before I forget, I want you to keep going on, but before I forget, I want to follow up on something that you just said there. As his wife and as a physician, you said that the 6 ICU admissions was too much. Elaborate on that a little bit, and if you could have crafted something different, what would that look like?
Well, I don't know that I could have crafted anything different as we went through them. Okay.
Got it.
And each crisis that wound him and us in the ICU, I mean, there was extraordinarily high quality medical care that saved his life a number of times. The situation was somewhat similar each time. He had a bunch of recurrences. It was a cardiovascular issue. He actually had colon cancer, but that's not what killed him. And it's funny because I remember, 3/4 of the way through that experience, and by then we were working with a palliative care doctor who was a friend. And I said to him, honestly, nothing has changed between now and when we started this. And now you tell me he's dying. I mean, we were having that conversation and I don't get it. Like what's changed? And because I wasn't always I couldn't always see things with physician's eyes. I was his wife. And he said to me, it's piling on. His body has been through this too many times. And it was kind of a piling on. And at some point the balance got tipped.
Now, do you all have children?
We do. Yes.
Okay.
We have a son who is grown and married, lives in Florida. And I have 2 older stepsons. Charles had 2 sons from his first marriage.
And how did they sort of react to this transition and the span of time from when he began?
So it was basically a year from 13 months from when the first event happened to when he died. And during that time, there was really intense family engagement. Our son lived locally, not in the house with us, but locally. And he was amazing at 24 years old to really, as I've told him since, he gave his father and gave us the gift of time. He was here every day or on the phone. Very much a part of the conversations as to what to do. what Charles wanted and didn't want, as were my two older stepsons, from a distance because they didn't live locally, but visits and certainly engaged. And it's interesting, blended families can be a challenge, right? Just by definition, they can be a challenge. The gift that Charles gave us of his clarity of choices was such that in the last several weeks of Charles's life, as he was actively dying and everybody was gathering, we never had to have another discussion as a family about what we would and would not do, which is really unusual. But Charles had been so clear.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. And I know that I know that probably since you're serving families in this space, that you find that I don't know if it's unique, that communication, but there's a lot of miscommunication when it comes to this chapter with many folks.
Much missed communication and so much missed opportunity. Because if there's one thing that I really feel strongly about, it's have the conversations. And they're hard. It's not easy to sit down and talk about, hey, we know you're dying, but what we found was that once that had been said, once that had been acknowledged, and it wasn't a linear process, it wasn't never to be discussed again. Lots of back and forth, lots of round and around, and a step forward and a step back, and it's as if you're flirting with it. But once it had been said, it was as if the elephant in the room wasn't there anymore. We could go on and live our lives in the face of the fact that Charles was dying. And that's actually why I called it a death lived. He lived that dying process in just the most remarkable way. There's an episode I remember, and I think I even describe it in the book, where it was wintertime and he and I were sitting by the fire, as we often did, talking about how he was dying and looking at the seed catalog, ordering seeds for the summer. And I was thinking, there's no way he's going to see these bloom, and he didn't. And yet you still hold this glimmer of hope. And so you can have both. Once you know you're in the dying space, it doesn't mean you have to stop living.
To stop. Exactly. And when you think about it, I think one thing in conversations on this topic that I've heard is where families, they start editing their conversations. Maybe it's a beach trip next year and it's like, oh, don't talk about it because he might not be there. But as we are living, we want to be involved. Most of us want to be involved in those conversations. And I had to catch myself because I say most of us, because it's important, I think, to have these conversations, because you might be the type of person that it's like, guys, I'm going to miss you so much. And I know I'm not going to make it on the beach trip. Have those conversations without me. Okay. So it's, wow. Before
and no right or wrong, right? It's having enough of a conversation so that the person who is dying and their close people around them, family or whomever, understand their values and what's important to them, and how that person wants this to unfold, to the extent that we have any control over it, which sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. But just like you said, it may be that somebody doesn't want to talk about it, and that's obviously their prerogative. But I would hate to think that we assume that for someone. Because what I find so often, and I used to see this in the hospital when I was doing hospital medicine, patient in the bed in the room, oh, don't tell my spouse that I'm dying. Spouse out in the hall, oh, don't tell the person in the bed they're dying. And I just want to shake them and scream and say, you're missing precious time where you can say things that once they're gone, you can still say them, but it's a different impact.
Yeah. Now, at the beginning, I talked about hospice providers, and I see that we've got several that are listening in on and part of this conversation. Did you utilize hospice with Charles?
We sure did. Yeah. So our experience started in March and Charles died the following April. So as I said, it was about 13 months. And in the fall, I think it was October, but I'd say halfway through, he and I started talking about, where's this going? What do we do? When is palliative care appropriate? How do we do this? And I called a friend of mine who's a hospice doctor and sort of presented the case to him, not saying who. And I said, what's the timing? What's the appropriate timing? And, I can still feel how my heart jumped when he said now. And he knew I was talking about Charles. I mean, we were friends, right? But what was so remarkable about that was that in working with Tom, it was a progression. He talked to us many times about what the possibilities were, and Charles was not yet ready to make that choice. And it wasn't as if Tom said, "Oh, you're going to die by this point of time," but it was he created the space to help us move into having those conversations. And when you get to where you want to do this, these are the options. These are the things we can do. This is what palliative care means. This is what hospice means.
Hey, I'm glad you brought that up, because there might be some people that are tuning in that don't really understand what hospice and palliative care does. Can you give us a brief overview of how you see those two?
Yeah, how I see it is a progression, and there's so much baggage with the words. I think that's where we fall down. And parking lot for right now, the whole conversation about how most of us physicians deal with it, which is a different conversation. But palliative care probably comes first. It's kind of symptom management. When I first was really educated about palliative care, I think I remember being told, sort of think of somebody who might be in the last 3 years of their lives. Somebody who has a condition that isn't going to get better, but they're not dying right now. But sort of that first foray into how many times do you want to keep going back to the hospital? How many, how aggressive do you want to be? So it's kind of that middle ground dance. And hospice, I think you're still supposed to have a life expectation of less than 6 months. That's, I think, a little arbitrary, and you can graduate from hospice. And people get the wrong impression that if you involve hospice, that means you're not going to get any further care. And I think that is something that's really important to know, that that's not true. If Tom spelled this all out for us. Like, if Charles wasn't going to treat his the thing that was killing him, but let's say he fell down and broke his hip, of course you're going to take care of that. You're going to be able to go to the hospital and get that dealt with. It's just that your treatment of the condition, your terminal condition, you're opting not to treat for cure. You're still treating symptoms and being cared for.
And I recently just did an interview on this topic, and I think when I talk to people who work in hospice and palliative care, the number one thing that they all say is people don't call us soon enough. Is that I think there's a lot of waiting before making that call, and probably the best thing that could happen is that you call. And Tom was your hospice doctor?
Yes.
You call Tom and he says, let's give it a few months, but at least you know that you made the call. Now let's Dixie has a question here. I didn't want to derail the direction you're going, but we'll get back on it. She says, can you explain the specific reasons why so many doctors are incapable of referring to hospice sooner than later. But well, Dixie, I guess we were thinking on the same topic there. And then fee for service medicine, fear of telling bad news, time involved in telling bad news, not understanding what hospice does. I refer to hospice without a doctor's order when unable to get it, and let hospice assess and make the decision of eligibility. Their hospice doctor can enroll them when the oncologist and primary care physician refuse to refer. Thanks for sharing that, Dixie. And Dr. Calihan, any sort of thoughts on why are doctors in general slow to refer?
Yeah, I wish I knew for sure. I have lots of ideas and thoughts about that. And I think it's really important what Dixie just said. A person can self-refer to hospice, right? So, or a family can. I mean, and that's really important to know. I think my generous view would be that we're not trained well to deal with end of life, and that sadly, I think some people do see it as a failure. I will say that one of the physicians who took care of Charles told me years afterwards that he had never been able to see a patient death as anything but his personal failure, which just broke my heart, because I hate to think of somebody carrying that burden. And I also wanted to say, who the heck do you think you are? I mean, newsflash, we're all going to die. It's the only certain thing, period. You can't prevent it forever.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are things worse than dying, and one of them is being kept alive for, just to be alive. That's a value judgment. But I think that there are physicians who haven't been taught how to do it well, and it's hard to sit down with someone and have that conversation.
Yeah, and in fairness, as I reflect on this, and I've never really thought of it this way, but depending on where you started your medical practice, let's say that it's in pediatrics or surgery or something like that, you could see where that sort of, that score of death is really can have an impact on somebody in that position.
It's hard to lose a patient.
Yeah.
But it happens. And I think that part of our job as physicians is to help, to ease that transition, to make it less uncomfortable, less painful. I mean, I just don't think people should die in pain. I think that the conversations should be had. I've gotten to the place where I have that conversation much more easily with people all the time. Like, have you thought about this? Even if they're perfectly well or seemingly well, what do you want? What are you talking to your family about? How, and people will tell you, they'll shut you down if they really don't want to talk about it. I find most people are incredibly relieved to have the door open to start that conversation.
Yeah. We've got some good questions coming in here, so let me jump on these. Yeah. Vivian says, Dr. Calihan's husband was an active agent in living in his dying process. Yes, I totally agree, Vivian. We as caregivers can learn to be their partners in this process. But turning this around, how do we help our dying loved one have the desire to live the final chapter, however long that may be? My husband in deep dementia no longer has the capacity to live himself and is being kept alive by me and the staff at his assisted living community. A lot to unpack there, but any thoughts on helping caregivers in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a situation and a burden that is especially hard, I think, when somebody is suffering from dementia. When I contrast that to what we went through, and Charles was such an active participant because he was cognitively fine until, several days before he died. I think the only thing that I would bring it back to is I would hope that we all have documents in place and have had conversations with people who are going to be our decision makers as to what we want and what we don't want. It's a funny, we're stuck in a funny place when a body won't die. I went through the experience 2 years ago with my mother, who was very old. She was 96. Hard to argue with that. And fell and broke her hip, and as predicted, 6 months later, died. And she didn't necessarily want to stay alive. And I used to tell her, I can't put a pillow over your head. I just can't, not allowed to. And we would laugh about it and joke about it. But we are kind of stuck in those situations. And I don't know how to suggest to help somebody live when they're cognitively not aware.
And, this is, I was waiting for this topic to come up, and Gary Weatherspawn, who I believe is with Final Exit Network, who we did a discussion with, says, based on your experience as a wife and MD, do you support the right to die on one's own term when facing end of life? And what are your thoughts on the
I do support medical aid in dying. I think it should be legal and available, and there are lots of permutations, and I know the arguments of some of the controversy with that, but I do think it should be legal and available and safe. There's so many instances in which somebody is at the point where they can't do it. Like maybe somebody in deep dementia can't do it. Somebody physically impaired can't do it. There are lots of outlying situations that still are fraught with a lot of difficulty. But I do support the movement. And I think you just put up, Steve, the Compassionate Choices website. Did I see that? Yeah.
And I'm also doing the Final Exit Network, and I'm putting that up. And then let's see. Actually, we had a good discussion on this topic a while back too, so I'm dropping that into to chat. But it's a conversation that people have, and I think before we were talking about this, do some research on medical aid and dying, because as both of us have found when we were talking before, you have to catch yourself to realize that this is not necessarily, it's not called assisted suicide for a reason, is because it's it's a different process.
It is. Yeah. But I do think that, with my interest in and passion about helping people have these hard conversations, I do think there's a tremendous tool available through Compassion Choices. They have a whole toolkit that helps people broach the whole subject and kind of lay out options. And sometimes I even find that it's easier to use a tool than to have that one-on-one with somebody if that's uncomfortable.
All right. And let's see. Vivian has another question here. She says, Dr. Calihan is practicing integrative medicine now. This type of medicine is not covered by Medicare and many other insurance policies. Why is that? How do we find integrative medicine practitioners that are covered by insurance? And I'll drop in a discussion we had on integrative medicine, but would you say that you practice integrative medicine, and could you give us an explanation of that?
I do. I do. It is integrative medicine. So it's using different systems and tools that we don't necessarily use in our regular Western medicine, whether that's herbal medicine or other botanicals or homeopathics. I do a lot of mind body medicine. And unfortunately, at this point, it generally is not covered under insurance. And I think that's a time issue, really. It's a very time intensive process. But I believe that's changing. Certainly the groundswell is shifting. And I know a lot of people who are working hard to figure out a way to have these kinds of services covered under insurance. So I think it will come in time.
And I just dropped in a discussion with Dr. Kogan, who is with George Washington University, and he's regarded as one of the leaders in that field. So so this is good. Okay.
We practice very much the same medicine now. So yeah.
I love it. Okay. So Adele says, my dad wanted me to help him die. He was 92 in hospice and had lost his wife of 62 years. He had 3 different types of cancer. I was a coward, and he lived another year and a half without his wife, and it made me very sad. Number one, Adele, thank you for sharing that story. And I'm just, Dr. Calihan, when somebody shares a story like that, whether they be in the middle of it or after the fact, what are some words of wisdom that you were able to offer?
I mean, I thank you for sharing that. And if you're here, in Virginia, certainly, I mean, if you're local, I don't think you were a coward. There's nothing else. I mean, we can't.
Right, because legally you can't.
What we can do is we can help people choose not to have things treated. Okay. My mother used to say that pneumonia was, when she was growing up, was the old people's friend, because it was, you were going to die when you get pneumonia. And if you were old, that was not such a bad way to go. I think that when somebody has reached the end of their life and they don't want to have further treatment, pneumonia, urinary tract infection, I mean, we can opt not to treat those things, right?
And that is not, that would not be considered aid in dying. That is just not treating, choosing not to treat that issue.
I can hear a little, pretend lawyer sitting on my shoulder saying, well, make sure that you're not slipping into abuse of somebody by withholding treatment. So that's a whole other discussion. But, people will get to the point where they choose to not eat or drink any longer. Okay. I mean, and I think as caretaker, family member, whatever, if we've had all those conversations and you understand what's motivating that person, then you can support them, be present with them, hold their hand. And that's a tremendous gift.
Yeah. And as we were also talking before, it's horrible. Well, I shouldn't say it's horrible. It can be challenging to watch somebody die over a period of time. But in many ways, that can also be a gift, because all of us could walk out the door today and be gone in an instant, and we didn't have the opportunity to prepare our families and to have conversations that we wanted to have, because it was immediate and more of a surprise,
I was sharing with you before when we were talking earlier, I have a close friend whose husband died getting off the treadmill. And it was fairly close to when Charles died. And we have shared many a glass of wine talking about, who had it better. Was it better for her husband or mine? Or who, was it easier for her or me? And, as Steve just said, we don't get to choose. And there are obviously pros and cons of both exits. But there is something beautiful in the being mindful and present through the process, because it's painful, rich, but beautiful time.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Let's see. Lewis says, I agree from my experience as a contractor and equipment installer that people want a real story. They are frustrated by medical folks who tiptoe around and avoid the real info on what the client should expect. Yeah, I mean, I think telling it straight is probably the best way to go. And but it's, you know, I'm not comparing this at all to, you know, when we have a conversation, when you having difficult conversations takes practice and empathy and support. Let's see. And then Adele says, and she's following up on her previous statement. She said, is there something I could have done to ease his emotional pain? So sort of looking back at that experience.
I mean, I don't know for sure, but I think just being with somebody, being present, and talking with them and acknowledging what they're going through, and, you know, maybe engaging whatever their belief system is.
And Adele and everybody, you know, we were chatting about this before we came on as well. Our number one topic of discussion on this platform is solo aging. And it's, Adele, I think one of the things that you referenced in your story is that his wife of 62 years had passed away, and, you know, he felt lonely and isolated. And one of the things that we're really having on these solo aging discussions is sort of living with the reality that our partner, and that more than likely one partner is going to outlive the other if we're fortunate enough to be married or be in a partnership. And by acknowledging that, now you can begin to have these conversations. It's always going to be painful. We're always going to grieve it, but expecting it may help ease some of that emotional pain in all of us, in kind of preparing for that. You know, a good friend of mine recently had his spouse passed away, and he was somebody who was very aware of all of this. And I was just sort of like, he was amazed at how, you know, how much he didn't know. And I said to him, I was like, you've been telling people to plan ahead for all this your entire life, your working career. And his response was, in my wildest dreams, I never expected that I would outlive her. And I kind of reflect on that is that I think maybe a lot of us feel that way. Is that, oh, for sure, my wife is going to outlive me. I'm not going to have to worry about being a solo ager. And again, none of us have a crystal ball.
It's very true.
Let's see. Okay. Okay. Carla. Carla Anderson. No, this is great. She's I referred to her earlier, a death doula. Open communication about how to be present and what type of support the dearly departing wants is a great place to start and recommit to day. So thanks for that. And then Nicole says, curious if Dr. Calihan has any experience on thoughts on music therapy. Off topic from the conversation, so no worries. No, just out of curiosity. Yeah, what types of therapies? Because you are practicing integrative medicine, and I think that integrative medicine provider would probably be more open to suggesting things like music and pet therapy.
I think they're both terrific. We also experienced, actually through the hospice, Reiki. So there are a number of therapies that can be brought to bear. And again, you know, having conversations with people ahead of time and knowing them, like what, you know, music is wonderful. It can help, you know, bring back memories. It can be very soothing. there are a lot of things like that that are useful. There's a document also that's called Five Wishes, and I can't for the life of me think who makes it. Maybe it's just
Yeah, I'll
fivewishes.com.
pull it up.
And they actually work through, it's like a little workbook where you work through a whole series of questions to see what you might want for yourself at end of life. And that was one of the first steps that we took in that direction. And we were working through it. And it was like, music or comfort or what. And when it got to the question about, do you want your feet to be rubbed with oil? I can still remember Charles was like, enough, I'm done with this. The oil, just let me be. But the cool thing about that is then right?
Yeah.
Okay, oil is not something that he wants. Now, we might have had that conversation closer to the time of death, and he, certainly could have changed his mind. But I think music actually is on that list of things that might be soothing to somebody. But, and you laugh about it when you first go through it, like, because you don't think it's going to happen to you, and certainly not right now. And it can sound a little goofy, but you've broken the ice. You're having the conversation. You're talking about whether you want your feet being rubbed with oil while you're dying.
No, I dropped the Five Wishes document in there. So many people reference that. And I think so many people have used it. It continues to be refined and really helping a lot of folks. Gary asks, a Stanford Med School survey of 1,000 doctors reported that about 90% would decline any of the interventions commonly provided at end of life, except palliative care. And he wants to know your thoughts on that.
I'd be right there with him, probably. And I think that's because, what we know, what we see is that I think our experience affords us the opportunity to realize sooner than non-medical people when you're reaching sort of a stage of futility, right? And that takes me right back to, I wish we were trained to be more honest and direct with people about, yes, these are the options that are available. These are the things we could do. And this is likely what might happen with them, and help people make choices. And there are people who want absolutely everything done. And I'm not denigrating that choice, but I think so many people, I think I use this term in the book, you get on that medical moving sidewalk and it's hard to get off.
Oh yeah, and especially, you're surrounded by people that love you and don't want to see you leave, so let's see. Barbara asks, can hospice use morphine to ease pain at end of life? And can they use enough morphine to bring on death? And we do have hospice providers on, but I'm not sure if you can answer that question, Dr. Calihan.
Certainly, yes to morphine. And I think I would defer to one of the hospice doctors, but personally, I don't think that people should have to be in pain or discomfort, and we have tools. It's a balancing act, right? And morphine also can be really helpful with breathing issues at the end of life. So if there's somebody on who wants to hop in.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if, Barbara, your question was sort of using morphine as a medical aid in dying. But my thought on that is that, well, could somebody accidentally be given too much morphine and then they pass away? I'm not familiar with that drug, Dr. Calihan. I know that it's a pain. It's used to help pain.
It is used to help pain, and it can slow down respiration. So,
okay.
Yeah.
But okay, let me jump back to the book. So I've added the link there, and here's the cover of the book in Amazon where folks can order it. But let me kind of roll. Oh, I forgot. Yeah, you don't have titles for your chapters. But as folks, as you can see, there's 20 chapters of the book. And tell us a little bit about the organization and kind of the story that is being told and how the book might help.
So really the story, as I wrote it, is a chronicle, basically, of that 13 months that we went through. Telling the story of what happened to Charles, telling the story of how I viewed it, and sort of some of it is my back and forth dance of like, oh, I'm sure he's getting better, and like, no, he really isn't. How and when we engaged with the palliative care and hospice people, some of the ups and downs of what does he want, what doesn't he want. A lot of discussion about the discussions we had as a family. I called it the death breakfast, when we were all together and he sat us down as a family and was absolutely crystal clear about what he did and didn't want. Not to be maintained, no dialysis, no feeding tubes, none of this. And that's when our son said, well, Dad, we could just have you taxidermied and just leave you in your chair forever. So, there was humor, there were tears, but that's really the trajectory of the book, is describing the process with those sort of internal conversations going on too, and then describing the whole sort of last 2 weeks of his life as he was actively dying.
And, I know your son was tongue in cheek about the taxidermy, and we don't practice taxidermy on humans. However, the end of life celebration and or a memorial or funeral, or what we want to call it, has really become quite creative and quite customized to people's needs, and they're customized to what they want to have happen. And you've probably seen the pictures of, folks that are sort of propped up in a chair, that at the kitchen table that they were always at. And that's how they want people to view them, not in a casket. And then you've got the surfer's funeral, where ashes are spread out in the ocean. Tell us a little bit about the conversations that you and your family had with Charles and how that went.
He was always very clear that he wanted a celebration and a party, not really so much what we would call a funeral. And you're bringing to mind a conversation as we got help and support from the priest at the church. And that's a whole separate story, because it had been a while since Charles had been sort of participating in any kind of church. But John came and was having a conversation, and he, talk about not being afraid of difficult conversations. Pretty early on, he asked Charles what he thought about a funeral. And I remember sitting there thinking, good God, you just, we just started talking, and I was just kind of good for you. And Charles very simply said, I could care less. I could care less. And I remember John saying, I understand that, because in his worldview, you're going to be in a state of total bliss and you're not going to care. But what he said that was so helpful was, he said, what I want to do is I want to help craft something that's going to help Martha and Connor and your other two sons at that time. And is that okay with you?
That's great.
It was a huge gift.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that is, he's gone, and now you've got the burden of, are we doing what he wanted? And so that's great. That you had those conversations. When referring to the book, or as I'm looking at the clock, we're getting close to the top of the hour. I want to give you the opportunity to share any insights that we may have not touched on, or that have been triggered by our community members asking questions, and any additional talking points that you'd like to make sure that we address.
My single strongest wish for people is that they have these conversations with their family members and their loved ones, even years before you think you're going to need it. We all think we're going to live till forever or whatever. And knowing full well that the situations can change. You might make different decisions when you're actually at that place, and that's fine. But start to have the conversation so that everybody knows what's important to you. I would love to see people have these conversations sort of like on an annual basis. I mean, many of us once a year might review, is your homeowner's insurance sort of still adequate? Your auto insurance, your financial documents, all those kinds of, not top of the list of joyful things to do, but why not include in there, who's your decision maker? Is there any reason to change that? Have you had a conversation with that decision maker, or can they actually do what you are going to ask them to do? Has there been a change in your situation in the last year such that you would change something? Just have that discussion once a year. Have it at the Thanksgiving dinner table. I don't know, when everybody's there. And I think if that were the norm, if people talked about it enough, it would be less scary, less of the elephant in the room. And then when the time comes, it's like, yeah, I know what mom wants, and now let's see how we can help make this happen, and not have to have this tremendous rift of, oh my God, who's going to broach the subject with her? It's, as I say, it's going to happen. We're all going to die. So I think the sooner we can use those words and talk about them as just a part of life, it's better for all of us. So that would be my call to action. Please, please, please have the conversation, because you'll be glad you did.
Yeah, and Dixie threw in there that now there are death cafes,
Yes.
and there's I want to track somebody down from this organization, Death Over Dinner, because it comes up quite a bit, and I think it's a great concept. And but it's a muscle that if we exercise it, it can really create some very thought-provoking conversation, and it's not as uncomfortable as it's sort of it makes it more manageable. Yeah. So and then also the Conversation Project is another.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Dixie, you definitely get the gold star today for sharing some great resources. And just a reminder, because somebody did just jump into the discussion a little bit late, all of these resources that we're dropping into chat are going to be on the recording link, and that'll be up in a few hours after this conversation. And then we also convert this into a podcast, so you could share it with your friend to listen to while they're walking the dog. Let's see. Betty asks, does the book talk about what you did after Charles died to support yourself in your grief? Yeah. Thank you, Betty. Tell us a little bit about that process, the grieving process that you went through.
Yeah, I know that the book ends as Charles dies. The grieving process, it is exactly that. It is a process. And when you mentioned earlier, aging alone, Steve, that certainly then became part of my life. I've got tremendous support from family, my son, siblings, friends. I'm really blessed to still have my practice. I have pretty strong spiritual practice. And I miss Charles absolutely every day. They're both true. It's not an or.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, this is great. And and the lots of good resources are being dropped into chat. And like I said, that's all being recorded. Well, Dr. Calihan, I have to agree with my friend Cynthia Shannon, who said you were an amazing presenter. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I really hope it's just the first of many. I'd love to have you back on again, and if there's ever a specific topic on this in this area that you'd like to talk about, or perhaps we have you back to talk about integrative medicine a little bit more. People are really interested in that as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here. I appreciate the time and everybody's interest and support. I think it's amazing that there's so many wonderful resources. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. And then just a reminder, folks, I know I dropped this into chat, but and several of these organizations are on the call today, but the positive aging community champions that we have that can support you with your aging end of life decisions, Bridging Life, Capital Caring Health, Carly Anderson, the death midwife who's on this call, Goodwin House Hospice. I saw that there are Goodwin Hospice, and Hospice at Chesapeake, Journey Hospice, and the Medical Team Hospice. Just some great resources. I think, one of the things to remember is that none of us have to walk this road alone, whether it be planning or in the middle of it. Reach out and talk to as many people as you can, and you'll be surprised at how many resources come out of the woodwork there. So,
Great.
all right, folks.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks again, Dr. Calihan. And thank you all for participating.